The dangerous advantage of being different. You're trying to fit in, and it's killing you. Not literally, not physically, but slowly, quietly, in the way that matters most. It's killing who you could become every time you adjust your opinion, to match the room every time you hide what you actually think, to avoid conflict every time you dress, talk, act like everyone else. Because different feels dangerous. You're erasing yourself. You're trading authenticity for acceptance, individuality for approval, uniqueness for safety. And you think this is smart. You think this is how you survive, how you get along, how you succeed. But here's what you're not seeing while you're busy blending in, while you're working so hard to be like everyone else. You're making yourself replaceable, forgettable, common. You're becoming one of 1,000 identical options in a world that rewards scarcity, that rewards distinction, that rewards the people who have the courage to stand apart. And the Stoics, they understood this better than anyone. Marcus Aurelius ruled Rome, but he didn't think like other emperors. Epictetus was a slave, but he didn't think like other slaves. Seneca was wealthy, but he didn't live like other wealthy Romans. They were different, deliberately, consciously, unapologetically different. And that difference, that willingness to stand apart from the crowd, to think independently, to live according to their own principles, not society's expectations. That's why we remember them 2,000 years later. That's why their words still matter. That's why they're still teaching us, while everyone who conformed, everyone who played it safe, everyone who tried to fit in, they've been forgotten, completely erased by time, because common doesn't last, doesn't matter, doesn't echo. And if you want to matter, if you want to build something real, if you want to become someone worth becoming, then you need to understand something fundamental. Being different is dangerous. It will cost you. It will make people uncomfortable, will make them judge. You will make them try to pull you back into the comfortable middle, where you don't threaten their choices. But being different is also the only advantage that actually lasts, the only edge that can't be copied, can't be commoditized, can't be taken away, because it's not a skill or a strategy. It's who you are, and who you are when you stop performing, when you stop conforming, when you stop hiding. That's the most powerful thing you have. Let me tell you what's actually happening right now. You're conforming, and you don't even realize it. You think you're making independent choices. You think you're being yourself, but you're not. You're operating within boundaries. You never questioned following rules. You never examined living by standards. You never chose. You're doing what's expected, what's normal, what everyone else is doing, and calling it your decision when really, it's just the path of least resistance disguised as choice. Here's what conformity looks like in practice. You want to build something, start something, create something, but you don't, because it's not what people with your background do. It's not what's expected. It's not the safe path. So you take the job you're supposed to take. You follow the career track you're supposed to follow. You build the life you're supposed to build. And every step of the way, you're moving further from who you actually are and closer to who everyone else thinks you should be, or you have an opinion, a real one, something you actually believe. But when you're in a group, when the conversation happens, you adjust, you soften, you hide it. Because saying what you actually think might create tension, might make people uncomfortable, might make you the odd one out. And you've learned that being the odd one out is dangerous, is something to avoid. So you blend, you agree, you nod along, and your real thoughts, they stay inside, unspoken, unshared, slowly calcifying into resentment because you're living a performance instead of a life. Marcus Aurelius saw this everywhere around him, people saying what they thought others wanted to hear, people adjusting their values to match the powerful people, conforming to survive. And he wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. B1, he wasn't interested in the performance, in fitting in being what others expected. He was interested in being what was right, what was true, what aligned with his principles, regardless of whether anyone else agreed. And that independence, that willingness to stand alone, to think differently, to be what he knew was right, even when everyone else was doing something different, that's what made him great. Not his power, not his position, but his refusal to conform. Epictetus taught his students this directly. He said, if you wish to be anything but what you appear, you will be miserable. And most people, they're appearing to be one thing while wishing to be another. They're conforming on the outside while dying on the inside, wishing they had the courage to be different, to stand out, to be themselves, but too afraid of what it would cost to actually do it. I've watched this destroy people with talent, with vision, with something real to offer, but they conform, they play it safe, they do what's expected, and year after year, they become more bitter, more resentful, more hollow, because they know they're living someone else's life, following someone else's script, becoming someone else's version of success. And the tragedy isn't that they failed. The tragedy is that they succeeded at becoming exactly what everyone else wanted them to be, while completely abandoning who they actually were. So here's the question you need to answer. Who are you when nobody's watching, when there's no one to impress? No one to please, no one to judge, when all the social pressure, all the expectations, all the shoulds and supposed tos are stripped away? What's left? And if you don't know, if you can't answer that, if you've spent so long conforming that you've lost touch with your actual self, then that's the first problem, because you can't be different if you don't know who you're being different from, and you can't stand out if you don't know what you're standing for. The first dangerous thing about being different is that it requires you to actually have convictions, to actually believe something, to actually stand for something. And most people, they don't. They have preferences, they have opinions, they have vague feelings, but they don't have convictions, they don't have principles. They're willing to defend positions. They're willing to hold truths. They're willing to speak even when it's uncomfortable. And without convictions, without that internal anchor, you can't be different, because you have nothing to be different from. You're just reacting, just adjusting, just conforming to whatever feels safest in the moment. Here's what having convictions looks like. You believe something, not because it's popular, not because everyone agrees, not because it's safe, but because you've examined it. You've tested it, you've lived it, and you've determined it's true. And once you've determined it's true, once it's become a conviction, once it's part of your code, you don't abandon it when it's inconvenient. You don't hide it when it's unpopular. You don't adjust it when it makes people uncomfortable. You hold it, you defend it, you live by it because it's yours, because you chose it, because it's not negotiable. Marcus Aurelius had convictions about virtue, about justice, about duty, about what it meant to rule well. And those convictions, they weren't always popular, they weren't always easy. They didn't always make people happy, but they were his, and he lived by them, regardless of pressure, regardless of criticism, regardless of what everyone else thought. Because conviction means, this is what I believe, this is what I stand for. This is who I am, and I'm not changing it to fit in. Epictetus taught that the beginning of philosophy is the recognition of one's own weakness and ignorance. And what he meant is this: you can't have real convictions until you've examined yourself, until you've questioned everything you think you believe, and determined what's actually yours versus what you absorbed from others, from culture, from expectation. And that examination, that questioning, it's uncomfortable because you discover that most of what you thought were your beliefs were just borrowed, were just adopted, were just things everyone around you believed and you never questioned. I know someone who spent 30 years thinking they had convictions, thinking they knew what they stood for, and then one day they actually examined it, actually asked, why do I believe this? Where did this come from? Is this actually mine? And they discovered that almost nothing was most of their beliefs, most of their values, most of their principles they were just inherited, just absorbed from parents, from peers, from culture. And once they saw that, once they recognized how little of what they believed was actually theirs, they had a choice. Keep performing, keep pretending, keep living by borrowed convictions, or burn it all down and build something real, something chosen, something authentic. And they chose the second option, and it was terrifying. It was lonely. It meant alienating people who expected them to stay the same, who needed them to stay the same, who were threatened by the change. But on the other side of that burning, of that rebuilding, they found something they'd never had before. They found themselves. They found actual convictions, actual beliefs, actual principles that were theirs. And once you have that, once you know what you actually stand for, being different isn't scary anymore, because you're not being different for the sake of it. You're being different because you're being yourself, and yourself is different from everyone else because everyone else is still conforming. Seneca said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And the suffering you imagine when you think about being different, about standing out, about not conforming, most of it never happens. Most of it is just fear, is just projection, is just your mind creating worst-case scenarios that have no basis in reality. But the suffering of conformity, the suffering of hiding, of blending, of becoming someone you're not, that suffering is real, that suffering is daily, that suffering compounds. So here's the practice you need to start. Sit down and write out what you actually believe, not what you're supposed to believe, not what makes you sound good, not what fits with your social circle, but what you actually think is true about work, about relationships, about success, about what matters, about how to live. And once you have that list, once you've articulated your actual convictions, you hold them, you speak them, you live them regardless of whether anyone agrees, because conviction without expression is just cowardice with good intentions. The second dangerous thing about being different is that people will resist it, will punish it, will try to pull you back, and you need to understand why, because it's not actually about you, it's about them. Your difference, your willingness to stand apart, to think independently, to live by your own code, it threatens them because it reveals that they have a choice, that they could do the same, that their conformity is voluntary, and they don't want to face that. So they'll criticize, they'll mock, they'll try to make you feel wrong for being different. Here's what happens when you start being different, when you stop conforming, when you start standing out the people around you. They get uncomfortable, they start questioning, they start asking, why are you acting like this? What's wrong with you? Why can't you just be normal? And those questions, those challenges, they're not actually questions, they're pressure, they're attempts to pull you back into the comfortable middle where your difference doesn't force them to question their conformity. Because here's what most people don't realize. Conformity is comfortable, it's safe, it's the path of least resistance. And when someone in the group breaks conformity, when someone stands apart, when someone demonstrates that there's another way, it creates cognitive dissonance for everyone still conforming, because now they have to acknowledge that their conformity is a choice, not a necessity, and that acknowledgement is uncomfortable. So instead of facing it, instead of questioning their own choices, they attack the different one. They try to normalize them, try to pull them back, try to eliminate the dissonance by eliminating the difference. Marcus Aurelius faced this constantly as emperor. Everyone had opinions, everyone thought they knew better, everyone wanted him to rule differently, to be more like past emperors, to conform to what was expected, and he could have given in, could have conformed, could have ruled the way everyone expected, but he didn't, because he understood that their resistance, their criticism, their attempts to change him had nothing to do with him and everything to do with their own discomfort with difference. Epictetus warned his students about this. He said, if you want to improve, be a content to be thought foolish and stupid. And what he meant is this: when you start being different, when you start living by your own code, people will think you're wrong, will think you're foolish, will think you're making mistakes, and you have to be okay with that. You have to be willing to be misunderstood, to be criticized, to be judged, because the alternative is conforming, is playing it safe, is living by someone else's standards, and that's a higher cost than any criticism could ever be. I watched someone go through this transformation. They had always conformed, always played it safe, always done what was expected, and one day they stopped. They started a business that didn't make sense to anyone in their family. They changed careers in their 40s when everyone said it was too late. They pursued something that mattered to them, even though no one understood why, and the resistance was immediate. Family questioned, friends criticized, people they respected told them they were making a mistake, and for a while it hurt. For a while they questioned, for a while they wondered if everyone else was right and they were wrong. But they kept going, they kept being different, kept standing apart, kept living by their own code. And something interesting happened. The criticism faded, not because people suddenly understood, not because they finally approved, but because they realized the criticism wasn't working, wasn't changing anything, wasn't pulling this person back into conformity. And once they realized that, once they saw that their pressure had no effect, they stopped, and the person, the different one they kept building, kept growing, kept becoming, and eventually the same people who criticized, the same people who questioned, they started asking, how did you do it? How did you have the courage? How did you know it would work? And the answer was simple. I didn't know it would work. I just knew that conforming was killing me, and being different, even if it failed, was better than succeeding at being someone I'm not. Seneca said, it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. And when you're conforming, when you're seeking approval, when you're adjusting yourself to fit in, you're craving more, you're craving acceptance, you're craving validation, you're craving the comfort of belonging. And that craving, that need for external approval, it's poverty, it's weakness, it's giving away your power to people who don't deserve it. So here's what you do when the resistance comes, when people criticize, when they question, when they try to pull you back. You don't argue, you don't defend, you don't try to make them understand. You just keep moving, you just keep being different, you just keep living by your code, because their resistance, their discomfort, their need for you to conform, that's their problem, not yours, and solving their problem is not your responsibility. The third dangerous thing about being different is that it's lonely at first. When you stop conforming, when you start standing apart, you lose people. You lose the comfort of belonging to the group. You lose the easy friendships, the surface connections, the people who were only there because you fit in. And that loss, that initial loneliness, it's real, it's hard. It makes you question whether being different is worth it. But here's what you discover on the other side of that loneliness. Here's what you find when you push through. You find your people, not the people who need you to conform, but the people who value you for being different, for being authentic, for being yourself. And those connections, those relationships, they're deeper, they're real, they're built on something more than shared conformity. Here's what happens when you're conforming. You have lots of connections, lots of acquaintances, lots of people who know you, who like you, who include you, and it feels good, feels like belonging, feels like friendship, but it's shallow, it's conditional. It's based on you being who they expect you, being who they're comfortable with, you being someone who doesn't challenge them. And the moment you change, the moment you start being different, the moment you stop fitting in, most of those connections disappear because they were never based on you. They were based on your conformity. Marcus Aurelius was emperor surrounded by thousands of people, but most of them didn't actually know him, didn't actually care about him. They cared about his position, his power, what he could do for them. And he knew this. He wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." He wasn't being pessimistic. He was being realistic. He understood that most people, most connections, most relationships, they're transactional. They're based on utility, on convenience, on conformity, not on actual connection, but the few people who actually knew him, who valued him for his character, not his position, who connected with his mind, not his power. Those relationships were different, were real, were deep, and those are the relationships that come from being different. Epictetus taught that loneliness is better than bad company, that it's better to be alone than to be surrounded by people who require you to be someone you're not. And that's the truth. That's the hard truth that being different reveals, because when you stop conforming, you lose the people who needed you to conform. And at first, that feels like loss, feels like isolation, feels like you made a mistake, but then you start attracting different people. People who value authenticity, people who respect independence, people who are also different. And suddenly you're not alone anymore, you're just selective. I know someone who lost most of their friends when they stopped conforming, stopped playing the game, stopped pretending to care about things they didn't care about, stopped showing up to things they didn't want to attend, stopped being who everyone expected, and for 6 months, they were lonely, really lonely, questioning whether being different was worth the isolation. But they kept going, kept being themselves, kept standing apart, and slowly, new people appeared, people who valued what they actually were not, what they could perform, people who respected their difference instead of resenting it, people who were also different, also independent, also unwilling to conform. And those connections, those friendships, they were deeper than anything they'd had before because they were based on truth, based on authenticity, based on actual compatibility, not just shared conformity. Seneca said, "The whole future lies in uncertainty, live immediately." And living immediately means being yourself. Now being different, now being authentic, now. Not waiting for permission, not waiting for approval, not waiting for the perfect moment when being different won't cost you anything, because that moment never comes. There's always a cost, but the cost of conformity, the cost of hiding, the cost of being someone you're not, that cost compounds, and eventually it's higher than any cost of being different could ever be. So here's what you accept. Being different is lonely at first. It costs you the shallow connections, the easy friendships, the comfortable belonging, but what you get, what you find on the other side, is worth it, because you get real connection, real friendship, real belonging, not to a group, but to yourself, and to the people who value who you actually are. The fourth dangerous thing about being different, and this is where it becomes an advantage, is that it creates space, creates opportunity, creates leverage, because while everyone else is competing in the crowded middle, fighting over the same things, the same positions, the same approval, you're operating in space that's less crowded, less competitive, less saturated, because most people are too afraid to go there. Here's what most people don't understand about conformity. When you conform, when you do what everyone else does, when you think how everyone else thinks, you're competing with everyone for everything. Every job, every opportunity, every relationship, every position, you're in a crowded market. And crowded markets are brutal, they're competitive, they're saturated, they're race to the bottom dynamics where you have to be the cheapest, the most convenient, the most accommodating, because you're indistinguishable from everyone else. And when you're indistinguishable, price is all that matters, availability is all that matters, and you lose. But when you're different, when you stand apart, when you think independently, When you build something unique, you're operating in a different market, a market with less competition, less saturation, more space, because most people are too afraid to be different, too afraid to stand out, too afraid to risk being wrong, and their fear, their conformity. It's your opportunity. Marcus Aurelius didn't compete with other emperors for approval, didn't try to be like past rulers, didn't conform to expectations. He was different deliberately so. And that difference, that uniqueness, it's why we remember him. It's why his words survived. It's why he matters, because he wasn't competing in the crowded space of conformity. He was operating in the open space of authentic leadership, of philosophical rule of thinking differently. And in that space there was no competition. Epictetus saw this in his students, the ones who conformed, who tried to fit in, who avoided being different. They were always struggling, always competing, always worried about what others thought. But the ones who embraced difference, who thought independently, who lived by their own code, they had space, they had opportunity, they had leverage because they weren't competing with everyone else. They were building something unique. I watched someone use this principle to build a career. They were in a field saturated with people. Everyone had the same credentials, the same background, the same approach, and they were all competing for the same jobs, the same clients, the same opportunities, and it was brutal. And this person realized they could keep competing in that space, keep trying to be slightly better than everyone else at doing the same thing, or they could be different, could approach the work differently, could serve different clients, could build something unique, and they chose different. They started doing things that made no sense to their peers, working with clients. No one else wanted, using methods no one else used, building a reputation for being the weird one, the different one. And at first, people thought they were crazy, thought they'd never succeed, thought they were throwing away their career, but within 2 years, they were booked. Solid, charging premium rates, turning down opportunities because they'd created space. They'd found a market with almost no competition because no one else was willing to be that different. Seneca wrote, "All cruelty springs from weakness and the cruelty of conformity." The way it crushes difference, the way it punishes uniqueness, it springs from weakness, from the fear of standing out, from the fear of being wrong, from the fear of being alone. And that fear, that weakness, it keeps most people trapped in the crowded middle, competing for scraps, while the edges where difference lives, they're wide open. So here's the advantage when you're different, when you're willing to stand apart, when you're willing to think independently. You're not competing with everyone. You're operating in space that most people are too afraid to enter. And in that space, there's opportunity, there's leverage. There's the chance to build something that actually matters because you're not just another option. You're the only option. You're not one of many. You're one of few, and few has power, has value, has advantage. The fifth dangerous thing about being different is that it requires constant courage. It's not a one-time decision, it's a daily choice, a moment-by-moment commitment to being yourself. Even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's lonely, even when conformity would be easier. And that requirement, that daily demand for courage, it's exhausting, it's hard, it makes you question whether it's worth it. But here's what you need to understand. Courage is a muscle, and the more you use it, the stronger it gets. The easier it becomes, the more natural it feels. Here's what daily courage looks like. You're in a meeting, everyone's agreeing, everyone's nodding along, and you see a problem, you see a flaw, you see something that's wrong, and you have a choice. Stay silent, blend in, conform, or speak up. Be different, risk being the one who breaks consensus. And in that moment, every instinct says stay silent, every fear says don't rock the boat. Every part of you that wants to belong says just let it go, but you speak up anyway. Not because it's easy, but because it's true, because staying silent would be betraying yourself, and that daily choice, that moment-by-moment decision to be yourself. instead of who others expect. That's where courage lives. Marcus Aurelius had to make this choice every single day as emperor. Every day there were opportunities to take the easy path, to conform to expectations, to do what was popular instead of what was right. And every day he chose differently. He chose courage. He chose principle. He chose to be different, even when it cost him, even when it made him unpopular, even when it would have been easier to just go along. Epictetus taught his students that courage is not the absence of fear. It's action in spite of fear, and being different, being authentic, being yourself. It's scary. Every time the fear doesn't go away, the discomfort doesn't disappear, the risk doesn't reduce, but your capacity to act, despite those things, that grows, that strengthens, that becomes part of who you are. I know someone who practices this daily every morning. They make one choice that requires courage, one choice to be different, to stand apart, to be themselves. Some days it's small, speaking up in a conversation, saying no to something. Everyone expects wearing something they like that others might judge. Some days it's bigger, making a career decision that doesn't make sense to anyone else, ending a relationship that looks good but feels wrong, starting something new that no one understands. But every day they practice courage, they practice being different, and over time it's become who they are. Not someone who's trying to be different, but someone who can't help but be themselves, because they've practiced it so much that conformity feels more uncomfortable than authenticity. Seneca wrote, "A life is long if you know how to use it," and using life, using your time, using your one shot at existence to be someone you're not, to conform, to hide, to blend in, that's the greatest waste. That's the real tragedy, because you had the chance to be different, to be yourself, to stand out, and you chose safety, you chose comfort. You chose the approval of people who wouldn't remember you anyway. So here's the daily practice. Every day, you make one choice, one decision, one action that requires you to be different, that requires courage, that requires you to stand apart. And some days it'll be hard. Some days you'll want to give up. Some days you'll wonder if conformity might actually be easier, but you do it anyway. You make the choice, you take the action, you be yourself. And over time, those daily choices, they compound, they build, they become who you are, and courage stops being something you need and starts being something you have. Here's what ties everything together. Being different is dangerous. It costs you. It requires conviction. It invites resistance. It creates loneliness. It demands daily courage. But here's what you get. Here's the advantage. Here's why it's worth it. You get yourself. You get authenticity. You get the chance to build something that's actually yours, that actually matters, that actually lasts. Because conformity is easy, but conformity is also death. Slow, quiet, invisible death of who you could have been if you'd had the courage to be a different. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." And you can't think quality thoughts when you're thinking everyone else's thoughts. You can't be happy when you're being everyone else's version of who you should be. You can't matter when you're trying to be like everyone who doesn't matter. Epictetus said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal," and freedom is what you get when you stop conforming, when you start being different, when you live by your own code instead of everyone else's expectations. And that freedom, that sovereignty, that's the advantage, that's the power, that's what makes being different not just dangerous but necessary. Seneca taught that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and the suffering you imagine from being different, from standing out, from not fitting in, most of it never happens. Most of it is just fear. But the suffering of conformity, the suffering of hiding, the suffering of being someone you're not, that's real, that's daily, that compounds into regret. So here's the choice. You can keep conforming, keep blending in, keep playing it safe, and you'll be comfortable. You'll fit in. You'll belong, and you'll disappear completely unremarkably. Or you can be different. You can stand out. You can be yourself. And yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it costs you. Yes, it requires courage. But on the other side of that danger, you find something most people never find: you. Find yourself and yourself when you stop hiding it, when you stop conforming it, when you stop diminishing it to fit into spaces too small for you. Yourself is powerful, is unique, is the only advantage that can't be copied, can't be taken, can't be commoditized, because it's yours. The world doesn't need more people who fit in, who conform, who think like everyone else. The world has plenty of those. What the world needs, what opportunity rewards, what actually matters, is people who are willing to be different, to think differently, to stand apart, to build something unique. And that person, that different one, that could be you, but only if you choose it, only if you accept the danger, only if you pursue the advantage, only if you stop asking, how can I fit in, and start asking, who am I, when I stop trying to stay focused, stay grounded, and remember, conformity feels safe. But different is powerful. Fitting in feels comfortable. But standing out creates opportunity. Being like everyone else feels easier. But being yourself is the only thing that actually matters. So stop trying to fit in. Start being different and watch how the danger becomes advantage, becomes opportunity, becomes the exact thing that makes you unforgettable.